frustrated. I locked around a grocery receipt from 1980, Faust. Pour gasoline over the little store I had built penny by penny, while her lover laughed behind her. Can need in town and way. The paper in my fist showed $3.17. That was all I had spent that morning before they decided I was worth more dead than poor. Try it. Lydia stepped saft over my broken legs in her red heels, careful not to let the smoke stain the hem of her white wool coat. Russagaline hated hand. I bought it secondhand from a church sale. But she wore it that night because she wanted me to see what my money had given her. Fees if and lot. You never understood value, Calvin, she said, as if I were another cracked tile on the stockroom floor. You saved coins. Victor made money move. Victor Hale stood beside the back door with my life insurance papers tucked under one arm and my store ledger under the other. He had been my supplier, my friend, my best man, and the man who had been sleeping in my bed whenever I stayed late counting cans of soup, foulnets. He smiled, the sauce. Don't look so betrayed, Victor said. You were born to be useful. That was your only talent. The first line of fire crawled across the floor, thin and bright, licking toward the cardboard boxes stacked against the wall. My ribs screamed when I tried to breathe. Lydia crouched just far enough away that I could smell her perfume through the gasoline, Talmud and Saster. She pulled the receipt from my hand. Since she read, then laughed softly. This is what killed you, darling. 100 Sal. Pennies. Your little discounts. Fallen could the fall moth. If you loved it enough. She dropped the receipt onto my chest. The flame reached the first box. I watched the paper curl black, so Lydia could have new curtains. Frassing Anon and loss. Because Victor said expanding credit would take time. Every quarter, I had dropped into the coffee can beneath the sink, anxious. Patient enough, loyal enough, I could build a life no one could take from me. Then the fire swallowed my name. I woke choking on cold air with my face pressed against a laminate diner table and a waitress snapping her fingers inches from my nose. Calvin, you alive in there? I jerked upright. So fast. The coffee cup in front of me rattled. The world smelled of burnt bacon, cigarette smoke, floor wax, and rain. Not gasoline, and hast. My hands were whole. My legs moved. From Norn. A cracked red booth pressed against my back. A jukebox near the entrance hummed out an old country song. Outside the window, a brown station wagon rolled past beneath a gray February sky, and across the street, the sign above my store read Whitaker's Corner Market, letters. In faded blue letters, not Whitaker's Discount Goods. Not the expanded store I had opened in 1991, the first store, the first year. My throat closed, frustrated and souse. A newspaper lay on the counter of the register. The front page said Tuesday, February 12th, 1980. I stared at the date until the numbers blurred. First asked. Marcy Bell leaned over me with a coffee pot tucked in her hand and one eyebrow raised. In my first life, Marcy had quit the diner 2 months later after her husband broke her jaw. I had heard about it and done nothing except feel sorry for her while stocking peaches. I forecast. You look like you saw a ghost. I touched my face. My skin was young, tight, unscarred by 30 years of stress. My wedding ring gleamed on my finger, bright and cheap. Lydia and I had been married 6 months. Victor had not yet become my partner. Theft. The store had not yet burned, and somewhere in town, Lydia was still pretending she loved a man she planned to outgrow. For Sast. I turned by instinct, and my stomach hardened. Victor Hale stepped inside, wearing a tan trench coat, rain shining on his shoulders, his smile easy and expensive. At 29, he already moved like every room owed him space. Behind him came Lydia, laughing under his umbrella, her hand resting on his forearm for one second and too long before she saw me and pulled away. In my first life, I had not noticed that touch. Lydia's eyes widened just enough to hide guilt under surprise. She crossed the diner toward me with her honey blonde hair tucked beneath a blue scarf I had bought her for Christmas. Victor followed at a slower pace, studying me the way a banker studied collateral. "There you are," Lydia said sweetly. Victor offered me a ride from the pharmacy. Pass. Victor slipped into the booth across from me without asking. "Morning, Cal," he said. "You look rough." I looked at his hands. Gold watch. No burn scars. Lydia sat beside him. Instead of beside me. Sal, that small choice would have ruined my morning. Once. I would have blamed the tight booth. I would have told myself not to be jealous. I sapped tan, paid for breakfast, and thanked Victor for helping my wife stay dry. This time, I took my hand off my coffee cup before I crushed it. Victor reached into his coat and placed a folder on the table. "I was hoping to catch you before you opened," he said. There's an opportunity, a serious one. I knew that folder. Feels. In my first life. Of the end. Victor had brought me a supply contract for canned goods, batteries, detergent, and cigarettes. At prices no small-town merchant could refuse. I had signed before lunch for Nat. 6 months later, when the interest terms the store I had borrowed against the store, when the invoices doubled, I had mortgaged the house for said and smiled at me. The folder sat between us like a loaded gun. Lydia touched its corner and smiled at me. "Cal. Victor says people who move early are the ones who win." In my chest, something cold and clear settled into place. I was not dreaming. No dream. Had. The waitress came back with the bill. I reached for my wallet out of habit, still watching Victor's folder. Inside were 4 $1 bills, a driver's license, a photograph of Lydia from our wedding, and I remembered this morning now. In the first life, I had paid for breakfast, signed Victor's contract, bought 3 boxes of off-brand cereal, and argued with Lydia that night because she wanted a new television. Frust loss. The receipt that died with me. I placed a $5 bill on the table. Marcy tore the check from her pad and said, "You want change?" Before I could answer, the air in front of my eyes split open. Not a hallucination, not smoke. A narrow line of the diner table appeared over the jumbled thread, thin as a letters. Only I could see. Cashback system activated. Condition met. Fermite. Logi. Host. With unresolved financial debt. Grievance. System Rule 1. Every legitimate penny spent by the host returns at 100 times value in pure gold. System Rule 2. Funds must be personally spent, voluntarily exchanged, and recorded by receipt, ledger, invoice, contract, or witness. System Rule 3. I loss. Gold returns in secure storage assigned to the host. Current qualifying spend, $5. Pending return, $500. In pure gold. My pulse vanished from my ears. Talked, unaware that the universe had just changed ownership. Marcy dropped my change beside the check. The gold letters shifted. Qualifying spend adjusted. Actual spend, $4.17. 400 pending pure gold. I stared at the coins. A laugh almost came out of me, but it was not joy. It was the sound a man made. Lydia frowned, opened from the inside. Calvin? I picked up the receipt, found Tauf, the paper, and 17 cents. $4. 100 times. Pure gold. In 1980, gold was not a number on a screen. It was weight. Frustrate. It was metal. Something banks feared, governments watched, and desperate men killed for. Victor tapped the folder. I folded the receipt once and put it in my shirt pocket. For the first time, I said. Victor's smile thinned. Then you understand this contract could change your life. It already did once. Lydia blinked. What does that mean? It means I'm not signing anything today. The booth went silent. Hand-in-law, thrusting back. He had expected, maybe gratitude, maybe a poor man's fear of missing out. Not refusal. You didn't open it. I don't need to. Lydia's foot struck mine under the table. A warning. Calvin, don't embarrass yourself. Victor is trying. I looked at her then. 24 years old. Soft mouth. Fruscheln and dot. The woman who would one day call me useful, while fire climbed my chest. You always were impressed by men who carried folders, I said, fast. Color rose in her cheeks. Victor's eyes sharpened. That sounded personal, he said. Frusted. It will be. I stood, took my coat from the hook, and left them sitting beneath the yellow diner light with the unsigned contract between them. The rain outside was cold enough to bite. I crossed the street to my store without opening my umbrella. Felt impossible. Every storefront, every parked car, every faded brightness of something resurrected was small enough that a man could stand near the register and see almost everything he owned. Tiles, a soda cooler, a cigarette case, canned vegetables, a pegboard of batteries, shoelaces, safety pins, and cheap flashlights. A back room with a sink, a cot, and inventory stacked to the ceiling. First, life. I had loved that place because it was mine. In this life, I loved it because it was still standing. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and froze, freezed out for it. Behind the counter, there now stood a small black safe I had never seen before. It was waist-high, plain, except for a circular dial, except for a circularly when I approached shimmered faintly. Gold storage assigned. Current balance. Open. And my mouth went dry. Far south. It says, knowing it. The safe clicked open. Inside lay 4 small gold bars and a scatter of coins, each stamped, with no mint mark, no government face, and no year. Only weight. They glowed. In the weak fluorescent light like captured sunlight, I picked up 1 coin. It was heavy, foul. Lydia. $4.17 had become enough gold to cover a month of rent on the store, maybe more if sold carefully. Host. A breakfast hat had turned into a mine. I closed the safe and locked it. Just as the front bell jingled, frustrating. Shaking rain from her jacket, her left cheek was slightly swollen beneath makeup. I had not noticed it earlier in the diner. Maybe I had not wanted to. You forgot your umbrella, she said, holding it out. I took it slowly. Thank you. She looked around the store. You all right? You walked out of there like you were going to war. I might be. That made her smile for half a second. Then she winced like smiling hurt, frustan lie. My eyes went to her cheek. She noticed and looked away. I remembered the future version of the story from Loth, her Nade. Her husband, Earl, would beat her worse in April. She would leave town in May with nothing but a suitcase. Years later, I would hear she died cleaning rooms at a motel off Route 9. Still sending money to a sister who never called, seemed to pulse behind me. You still good with numbers? I asked. Marcy frowned. At school, you helped half the seniors pass bookkeeping. That was a long time ago. Not that long. She hugged her jacket closer. Why? I need someone to help me track purchases, receipts, inventory, and cash movement. Few nights. A week. Paid in cash. Suspicion crossed her face. Then need. Then caution. Lydia, know you're hiring? No. Victor? She studied me for a long moment. How much? I almost said. Too little. The old Calvin would have counted nickels, afraid generosity would sink him, holding a receipt. $2 died, and said. $2 an hour to start, I said. 3 if you can keep records cleaner than mine. Her lip sparked at. In 1980, that was enough to matter. You serious? Dead serious. The words landed strangely between us. I pulled a blank sales receipt from under the counter, wrote her name, the date, and $1 as an advance for future bookkeeping services. Fern Lawson sent. She stared at the paper. You want a receipt for giving me $1? I want receipts for everything now. The gold letters appeared. $1, pending return $100, in pure gold. I nearly smiled. Frost. A frost in south. As if afraid it might disappear. I can come after 6, she said. Earl thinks I'm working late on Thursdays anyway. Come through the back door. Her eyes flicked to mine, wary again. For privacy, I said. Not shame. Something softened in her face. After she left, I locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and stood behind the counter with my hands flat on the wood. Spend money. Get gold. And tan laws. The more I spent, the more I gained. Recorded. From Sal. I would attract every thief to the battlefield. Gold had to become cash. Cash had to become assets. Had to become leverage. And leverage had to become a trap. Victor understood movement for our scythe. Lydia have to understood appearance both. I opened my old ledger and wrote the first line of my second life. February 12th, 1980. For people who plan to burn you. Then I made a list. An inventory low. Bank loan balance. Powder with little alternatives. Local pawn shops. Coin dealers in 3 towns. Storage C units. Asked. So, receipts. Paper trails. And bought a new deadbolt. A fireproof file box. A ledger. Receipt books. Carbon paper. And a cheap Polaroid camera. Lost. Total spend. Held. $38.62. By 1, the safe held nearly $4,000 more in gold. By 2, I understood the first beautiful cruelty of my new life, parsons and sand. The system did not reward hoarding. It punished fear. Every penny I had been too afraid to spend in my first life had been a seed I had refused to plant. Fruct and law. The world had trained me to worship smallness, then mocked me for staying small. Not again. Rust, south. 30 miles. To a coin dealer named Saul Brenner, a narrow man with liver spots on his hands and 3 locks on his office door. I did not bring all the gold, just enough to test the water. Where'd you get this? Private family piece. No markings. That a problem? That depends if you're lying badly or carefully. I said nothing. Saul looked at me over his glasses, then chuckled. Hound. Pure enough. Too pure. Maybe. He named a price lower than market. In my first life, I would have accepted gratefully. In this life, I reached for the coin. Thank you for your time. His fingers closed over it first. Hold on. I looked at his hand until he removed it. He owned ein Loft. A handwritten receipt and confirmation that the gold was real enough to make greedy men blink. The system pulsed again when I paid for gas on the way home. Fran lost. Spend became gold. Cash. Cash would become an empire. When I returned to town near dusk, Lydia was waiting outside the store under the awning, arms crossed, mascara sharpened into anger. You closed early. Yes. Victor came by. I assumed he would. She stepped closer. What is wrong with you today? I unlocked the door, but did not invite her inside. Fair-in-law. You embarrassed me in front of him. There it was. Not concern. Fram sa. Embarrassment. I had disrupted the performance. Funny face. Victor isn't funny, Calvin. He has connections. He knows suppliers. He says your store will die if you don't expand before Miller's opens their new supermarket. In my first life, those words had terrified me because they were partly true. Miller's supermarket would open in November. Half my customers would vanish within a month. Frustrating and lost. To slide a chain around my throat. This time, fear arrived and found no chair waiting. Then I'll expand without him. Lydia laughed once, sharp and ugly. Countertoed. With what money? I thought of the safe. I thought of the gold. I thought of her, standing above my dying body, reading the receipt. Fast. With every penny you thought was pathetic, I said. Her face changed. For one instant, the mask slipped and I saw the woman from the fire, and that a tool had developed an edge. For sign said. Then she smiled again. Come home, she said, softening her voice. We'll talk. I'm sorry if I pushed too hard. I only want us to have a better life, us. The oldest bait. I stepped inside. Less story to count. I'm your wife, I remember. That wounded her, more than an insult would have. She stared at me, then turned and walked away through the rain without looking back. Fresheft. At 6:15, Marcy came through the back door with a notebook, a pencil, and a bruise blooming beneath her collar. She saw the new deadbolt first. Then the fresh ledger. Then the receipts stacked in neat piles. You weren't kidding, she said. No. For 3 hours, we worked in the back room. I gave her invoices from the past year. But within the first 20 minutes, by 7:30, she found a delivery fee I had paid twice. Freston. Every third invoice had a small irregularity, never enough to fight over, always enough to bleed me. Marcy tapped the page with her pencil. He's been shaving you. How long? Since September. My wedding month. Marcy looked up. That's not a happy laugh. No, it's an educational one. At 9, a fist pounded on the back door. Marcy flinched so hard her pencil snapped. Open up, a man slurred. I know you're in there. Earl. In my first life, I would have stayed out of it. Domestic trouble was private, people said. Castle, people said. Cowards had many proverbs. Earl pounded again. For Marcy. You lying this damn door. Her face drained. I should go, she whispered. No. She looked at me like I had spoken in another language. I walked to the but did not open it. Earl, I called. She's working. A pause. Whitaker? This ain't your business. You're standing at my business door. Another pause, shorter this time. You think that makes you brave? No, I said. That does. He kicked the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Marcy covered her mouth. Marcy Polaroid. I picked up the Polaroid camera, aimed it through the small back window, and snapped a picture, just as Earl raised his boot again. First white. He stumbled back, blinking. What the hell? I took another photo. Fast. Damage to commercial property, I said through the door. Witness present. Photographs taken. Keep kicking. The silence outside sat grew thick. Earl cursed, but his voice had lost shape, thrust him south. His footsteps retreated into the alley. Marcy did not move until they faded. Then she sat down on the cot and started shaking. I placed the 2 Polaroids on the ledger beside Victor's invoices. Photograph. A witness. For and loss. It had given me religion. Paper was protection. Paper was memory. Paper was a blade that could cut years later if kept sharp enough. Marcy wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. Why are you doing this? Because I watched too many people burn while I counted pennies. Because I had already seen what silence cost. Because Victor and Lydia were almost the world owed me. I said, because this time, I'm keeping records. Near midnight, after Marcy left by the front door, with her first envelope of wages and copies of Earl's photographs tucked safely into her purse, I opened the black safe again. More gold waited inside, from kindness. Not from revenge, from spending, from movement, not from daring to turn money loose with discipline instead of fear. I picked up a bar and felt its weight press into my palm. Tomorrow, Victor would return with a sweeter offer. Lydia would return with softer eyes. The bank would still think I was a small merchant with a failing corner store. Faust. Miller's supermarket would still be coming. And in some office 30 miles away, Saul Brenner would be wondering how many more unmarked gold coins a quiet man from a dying town might have hidden away. I had enemies ahead of me, but for the first time in either life, I also had math, Cal and Tacherit. 1 penny spent. 100 pennies returned in gold. I placed the bar back in the safe and closed the door. In my first life, they killed me for 3.17 cents. In this one, I was going to spend enough to buy their whole world. By morning, Victor had changed tactics, him alone. He arrived at 9 sharp in a black Lincoln with polished chrome for staying in law. Parking, so every customer walking past would know someone important had come to see me. Past. The passenger door opened for Cecil Sai. Stepped out with a leather briefcase in one hand and a cigar tucked unlit between his teeth, flushed in line. I recognized him from the old timeline. Franklin Pierce, Vice President of County Trust Bank. In my first life, I had met him 3 months later. Sweating through my only decent shirt, while asking for a line of credit I did not understand. He had called me son 3 times. He left my seeing paperwork and buried clauses inside the paperwork that wrapped my store tighter than rope. Victor held the door open for him now, smiling, as if we were all civilized men with civilized intentions. Cal, Victor said warmly, a haze sense. Pierce looked around my store with the polite disappointment of a man inspecting a property he already expected to repossess. Mr. Whitaker, he said, I've heard good things. No, you haven't. Victor's smile froze for half a second. Pierce chuckled, but his eyes measured me more carefully. Direct man. That can be useful in business. So, leaving before the coffee gets cold. Victor stepped closer to the counter and lowered his voice. We're trying to help you get ahead of Miller's. You know they break ground next month. Good for them. Don't pretend you're not worried. I'm not pretending. Pierce placed his briefcase on the counter. The click, the latches sounded rehearsed. Inside were loan documents, crisp as fresh snow, and a fountain pen laid across them like a dagger on velvet. County Trust can extend a small business modernization loan, he said, Fraynord. Shelving, refrigeration, perhaps even a delivery van. With Mr. Hale's supply network, guaranteeing stable stock, you could compete. The words were clean, The trap beneath them was familiar. How generous. It's not generosity, Pierce said. It's confidence. Victor leaned in. Friday. In the original life, Friday was when I had signed the secondary purchase order that gave Victor control over inventory selection. He had sent slow-moving goods, expired detergent, dented cans, and cigarettes billed at premium rates. At the time I noticed, I was too indebted to reject anything. I tapped the documents once with my finger. What's the prepayment penalty? Pierce blinked. Victor's head turned slightly. What? Pierce smiled thinly. Standard early. Standard language. Define standard. It discourages unstable borrowers from cycling debt irresponsibly. How much? He removed the cigar from his mouth. %, of outstanding year. And the inventory? Security clause? Victor said, Cal, you're getting lost in weeds. Weeds are where snakes live. Pierce closed the briefcase halfway. You've been advised by someone. No, I said. I've been killed by this kind of paper. Silence fell so sharply, even Mrs. frowned incessantly. Donnelly stopped browsing the soup shelf. You're being dramatic. I looked past him to the front window. Freeing sounds and loss. Trosters. Lydia stood across the street beneath, pretending to look at greeting cards fells through the glass, while watching everything. Of course, send Victor with power. Frustas. Send Pierce with paper. Keep Lydia outside. As the soft hand for Lather, I took a receipt book from under the counter and wrote carefully. Consultation declined. No agreement signed. No goods ordered. Sal, no credit accepted. Then I turned it around and signed that you came here. And I refused. His expression cooled. Why would I sign such a thing? For my records. Victor laughed under his breath. You hear that, Franklin? He wants a receipt for a conversation. Yes, I said. Conversations are where men like you plant bombs. Pierce shut the briefcase. You may regret refusing legitimate capital, Mr. Whitaker. I regretted accepting it more. The bell over the door rang hard when they left. Mrs. Donnelly approached the counter with 2 cans of tomato soup and a box of matches. She was 72, sharp-eyed, and knew every rumor in town before the people involved did. You refusing bankers now? She asked. Only the friendly ones. Good. She paid $1.12. I sound unlost. Even though she had never asked for one in her life. The system did not reward customer transactions to me. It only rewarded what I spent. For math. Still, I kept the record. Money entering mattered too. A kingdom did not survive by watching only the gates people left through. Frushed and gnaw it. At 10:30, and a paper bag of diner biscuits. I'm off until noon, she said. Brought breakfast. I took the bag, then immediately wrote her a receipt for office meal reimbursement and handed her $2. For biscuits? They're business biscuits. That is not a real category. It is now. Qualifying spend. $2. Pending return. $200 in pure gold. Marcy narrowed her eyes. You always look pleased after spending money. New habit. Most men look sick. Most men don't know what money is for. We spent the next hour building a proper accounting system on the folding table in the back. Outgoing purchases. Inventory, turns, vendor, costs. Personal expenses separated from business expenses. Cash reserves. Receipts numbered and clipped. Marcy's mind moved fast when fear was not sitting on her chest. Found. Victor's not only overcharging you, she said, turning the ledger toward me. He's testing how much you'll question. $4 as extra. October. 9. Then sound. November 27, January 41. Escalation. Exactly. Fels. You sin accept bigger theft. I looked at the numbers and felt something inside me settle further. Victor had not ruined me by one dramatic betrayal. He had conditioned me. A small cut, then a larger one, then debt, dependence, then the fire. I had spent my whole first life believing disaster arrived as lightning. No, it arrived as paperwork. Marcy tapped another column for sound. Also, this supplier in Ohio charged you less before you switched to Victor. Can we call them? She hesitated. Long distance costs. I smiled. Good. By 2 o'clock, we had spent $6.80 on calls to 3 suppliers, 2 auction houses, and 1 used equipment dealer outside Cleveland. Frost southed and lied. Every name recorded, every quote dated, filled quietly, came from the information. The Ohio supplier would sell directly if I prepaid. Fees and loss. Had surplus canned vegetables after a canceled school unit town orders. Was replacing small refrigerators in 50 rooms. And would auction the old units by lot. The equipment dealer had 2 used glass door coolers, ugly but functional, for $300 each if picked up within a week. Frustdown Tamat. Sounda. Now, it sounded like a door. At 3:15, I drove to County Trust Bank with $900 in cash from Saul Brenner and opened a separate business account under the existing store name. Saw me from his office. His face changed when the teller counted the bills. Not much to confuse him. Confusion was useful. Faryat. And after the bank, and ordered bright sale flyers for Whitaker's Corner Market. Not fancy, not expensive. Local goods. Fair prices. Receipt with every purchase. Free delivery for seniors within town limits. Fee. At the hardware store, I paid a deposit on 2 second-hand steel cabinets and a reinforced back door. At the county clerk's office, I paid filing fees to register Whitaker Purchasing Company as a separate trade name. First story nath. For buying things, I said. For buying things, I said. She laughed because she thought I was joking. Frussum Sashin. To make my enemies impatient. Lydia was in the kitchen when I came home. Our rented house smelled of pot roast, onion, and performance. Last. She had set the table with the blue plates we only used when she wanted something forgiven. 2 candles burned in the center, though the electricity worked fine. She wore the pale green dress I liked, would have softened at the sight. He would have thought, maybe I was unfair. Maybe she was embarrassed because she cared from lost. Maybe marriage meant absorbing small humiliations until love returned. The new Calvin took off his coat and checked the ashtray. 2 cigarette butts. Lydia saw my eyes move. Mrs. Klein came over, she said quickly. She was upset about her nephew again. Mrs. Klein smokes menhols. The room went still. Lydia turned towards stirring nothing. I don't like this version of you. You liked the version that apologized before understanding why. I liked my husband. You liked my usefulness. She slammed the spoon down. What is wrong with wanting more? Frussum Sal. We live in a house where the sink groans. You drive a truck that sounds like it's full of rocks. I can't even invite people over without feeling ashamed. You invited Victor. Her shoulder stiffened. Kaya. Then she turned, eyes wet. You're becoming cruel. I looked at those tears and remembered smoke. No, I said. The tears faltered. At dinner, she tried another angle. She apologized for pushing Victor's contract. Fee ends. She said she only wanted me respected. She said men like Victor knew the world, and men like me needed allies. She touched my hand when she spoke, thumb brushing my knuckles in the exact rhythm that had once made me forgive anything. I honed in stealth. She did not know about the gold. She did not know about the system. When she asked where I had been all day, I said, spending money. Her mouth tightened. On what? Growth. We can't afford mysterious growth. We couldn't afford Victor either. She pushed her plate away. Rusenha, you are going to ruin us out of pride. No, I said I already saw what ruined us. What does that mean? I stood, took my plate to the sink, and left her with the candles burning lower between us, and lost. That night, I slept in the store. Not because I feared Lydia would kill me yet. She and Victor were not desperate enough. Faust. Not because I trusted the deadbolt completely. I slept there because the safe was in the back room, and because the store, not the house, felt like the place where my second life had begun. At 3 in the morning, I woke to glass breaking, thrust in darkness. A scrape came from the front of the store, then a whisper. Crunch of shoes over broken glass. I rolled off the cot silently and reached for the baseball bat beneath it. My heart pounded, but beneath the fear was something harder. Sat. In the first life, I had been surprised by every attack. I moved through the back room and looked through the cracked office door. Asked. Faces covered with bandanas. One was short and wiry. The other broad-shouldered, nervous, holding a tire iron. Faff, professionals. They were local muscle. Men hired cheap to scare cheaper. The short one. That one whispered. Just the register and mess. The shells. Random. The broad one said. Hale said no names. My grip tightened on the bat. Victor's first fall had arrived earlier than expected. Home loss. The short man pried at the register. The broad one swept jars for Alice from a shelf. With his tire iron, glass burst across the floor. Fear. Damage. Insurance enough without fingerprints. I waited. The broad one stepped near the counter, flipped on the lights. Both men froze. The Polaroid flash went off before either could move. White light blasted their covered faces. Their tools, the broken window, the open cigarette case, the short one. Cursed and bolted. I threw the bat low, not at his head, but at his knees. Souse lost. It struck his shin with a crack, and he went downs. The broad one rushed me with the tire iron. Fear tried to lift my hands too high. How crescents. I writhed, dying on the floor, unable to move. I stepped sideways. The tire iron smashed the counter where my ribs would have been. I drove my shoulder into his chest and brought my knee up hard. He folded with a sound like air, leaving a tire. The short one crawled toward the broken window. Hasanoff. Then another. Then I said, smile for Victor. The broad man stopped struggling. And in Sadie. The short man turned his head slowly. I crouched beside him and pulled the bandana down. Tommy Voss. Vic used him in the old life too, though much later when I had already stopped looking people in the eye. Tommy had burned part of his own garage for insurance money once and bragged about it drunk at the tavern. Tommy, I said, you picked a bad night to become paperwork. He spat at me and missed. You don't know anything. I know. Victor Hale sent you. His eyes flicked before he could stop them. The broad man groaned. Shut up. Too late. Frassinenly and Nolan. Then I called Mrs. Donnelly, whose house faced the alley and whose testimony could melt steel if she disliked someone. Marcy. By the time the sheriff arrived, I had 6 photographs, 2 injured broken window, a damaged cigarette case, scattered inventory, frustrating incident. A statement with the words suspect. Mentioned Victor Hale, unprompted. Placed carefully in the middle. Frustin Lauder. Sheriff Nolan was a tired man with silver hair, a belly over his belt, and a moral compass that worked best when watched by witnesses. He looked at Tommy bleeding on my floor. Looks like burglary. Looks like conspiracy. Nolan sighed. Calvin. I held out the photographs. Fast. Mrs. Donnelly stood near the door, in her robe and slippers, arms folded. I heard one of them say, "Hail." Clear as church bells. But she hated Victor because he once parked in front of her driveway. I summed the sign. Marcy arrived 10 minutes later with her coat over her nightdress, and Earl's old bruise still visible at her collar. She said she had been helping audit suspicious invoices connected to Victor. She had copies. She had dats. She had patterns. Nolan looked less tired after that. Paper on one side, rumor on between. A shape began to form. Tommy saw it too, frust and loth. Men like him understood jails, the way bankers understood interest. It was just supposed to scare him, he blurted. Nobody said anything about getting arrested. The broad man swore. Tommy swallowed. I did not smile. Not yet. A desperate confession in a messy store could bruise Victor, but not break him, and exposed enough that each movement tightened the rope. So I said, "Sheriff, I want charges filed for the break-in and damages. As for who encouraged them, I'm sure your office can investigate properly." Nolan heard the warning inside the politeness. Han lot lie. Marcy heard strategy. By sunrise, the vandals were gone in Norris' car. The sheriff's car, the broken window was boarded, and half the town had already heard 3 different versions of what happened. In all of them, I had stood alone against hired men and won. Customers came by before opening, partly to buy, mostly to look. Mrs. bought coffee she did not need. Mr. Alvarez from the repair shop bought cigarettes and asked if I needed help replacing the glass. 2 boys offered for a quarter each. I paid them $1 each, wrote receipts for cleanup labor, and watched the system turn kindness into ammunition. At 9, I called the local paper and paid for a larger ad. Frust remained souse. Break our window, not our prices. Receipt with every purchase. Free senior delivery starts Monday. The woman at the paper laughed so hard, she gave me the better placement. Paid ad, $42, and SAF pending with Thal. The ad would run Saturday. Victor came at noon for ad hands cloth. He arrived without Pierce, without a briefcase, without a smile. His Lincoln stopped across the street. He stepped out slowly, aware of every face turning toward him. Had become a theater. Good. He entered the store and surveyed the boarded window, the swept floor, the cigarette case taped at one corner. First rates. Yes. People are getting bold, careless too. His eyes met mine. For a moment, the mask dropped, and I saw the man from the fire again. Frustum hast. The same amusement, the same contempt. Only now it was mixed with irritation. She careful, Cal. Stress makes men imagine patterns. Does it? They see enemies where there are only accidents. I reached beneath the counter and placed a Polaroid between us. Not Tommy's face. Fernet. Not the broken window. The one where Tommy's eyes flicked sideways the instant I mentioned Victor's name. It proved nothing in court. Confidation. Victor looked at it. His jaw tightened. Towel with Picking up photography? Records. You keep saying that word. You keep giving me reasons. He leaned closer, to outside. Could not hear, Assam Sal. When a small man starts making large accusations. I leaned closer too. Then introduce me. His nostrils flared. It's the first time I saw it clearly. Victor did not fear police yet. He did not fear me yet. Frust Allah. He feared uncertainty. I was no longer following the script he had written. And men like Victor hated improvising unless they controlled the stage. He straightened and smiled loudly. I'm glad you're safe. If you need temporary credit to repair the damage, my offer stands, Mrs. Donnelly said. From aisle 2, don't sign it, Calvin. That man's smile has termites. Victor's face reddened. A few customers laughed, not loud. Thick. Loss. Enough. Humiliation touched him lightly, and he did not handle it well. He left without buying anything. Marcy and found me staring at the door. You won that round, she said. No. No? He came here in daylight. He threatened me in my own store. That means he still thinks I'm smaller than the consequences. She took off her gloves. Then what's next? We make him need me. Her pencil paused above the ledger. I pulled out the motel auction, the cooler dealer, and the county business filing. Then I unfolded a county map and marked every small store, gas station, diner, bait shop, farm stand, and church pantry within 50 miles. Victor controls supply by making everyone buy separately, I said. Fought. Small stores pay more because small stores are alone. I'm going to pool orders. Marcy stared at the map. With what trust? Half these people barely know you. They don't need to trust me. They need lower prices. And the cash to place orders? I opened the safe just enough for her to see one gold coin. Not the bars. One coin. Her face went blank. Not for a second I wondered if I had made a mistake. Then she whispered, Calvin, what have you gotten into? A second chance. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have. She looked at the coin the way a starving person looked at a locked pantry. Not greedy. Frostful. Is it stolen? No. Did Victor hide it? No. Does Lydia know? No. Marcy's eyes returned to mine. She understood more from that answer than the others. Pound and elf. Nobody can touch what they can see, she said. I felt a quiet respect settle between us. Exactly. For the next week, we moved. Euphorically. Not foolishly. We moved like water finding cracks. Frustal. Paid for a truck. Rental. Fuel. Rope. Gloves. And 2 men from the repair shop to help unload. Receipts for all of it. Gold for all of it. Frust. The refrigerators were ugly, but after Mr. Alvarez cleaned the coils and replaced 2 cords, they worked. I placed one in my store for milk, eggs, and cold soda, a fine than loth. The others I leased cheaply to a diner, a bait shop, and a gas station in exchange for signed supply commitments through Whitaker Purchasing Company and Loth. I prepaid the Ohio supplier for detergent, canned goods, batteries, and paper products at prices Victor could not match unless he destroyed his own margin. I bought the surplus from the farm co-op and sold them in mixed discount boxes, labeled Pantry Saver, Frustang, and Lost. I paid to deliver groceries to seniors on Monday and Thursday afternoons, each delivery logged with customer signatures. Every dollar spent came back as gold. Every gold sale became cash. Hoppers and lost. Purchase became infrastructure. And every piece of infrastructure made my store less like a corner market and more like a nervous system. By the second Saturday, People were not only shopping at Whitaker's frat, they were talking about it. Frasta by the third, three small store owners had called, asking whether they could join my next bulk order. Home. By the fourth, Victor's invoices began coming back unsigned. At some shout. That was when Lydia stopped pretending. She entered the store near closing with no scarf, no sweetness, and Victor's anger sharpened behind her eyes. You're humiliating him. I counted change into the drawer. Difficult for him. He helped you. He robbed me. You have no proof. I looked toward the back room where Marcy was filing copies of invoices. I have enough. Lydia that lowered her voice. I think she can add she wants something from you. Most people do. She's damaged, Calvin, on the cash drawer. From smiled. Because she had finally found a soft place to press. People like her drag trouble behind them. You bring her close, Earl comes too. From police. Then gossip. Then your precious business suffers. Victor says, you should. Because he knows things about this town you don't. No, I said quietly. He knows things about the old me. Her eyes narrowed. For Simpson sows. I pulled a small envelope from beneath the counter and slid it toward her. Inside were copies of duplicate invoices, overcharges, delivery discrepancies, and a photograph of Tommy Voss on my floor. Lydia did not touch it. What is this? A choice. Her laugh was thin. Between what? Between walking away from Victor now or standing close enough to him when the floor opens. For one moment, I saw fear. Not remorse, force and Sal. Then she leaned over the counter and whispered, after you were easier to love when you were weak. The old insult returned from the fire in different clothes. I took the envelope back. I was easier to use. She slapped me. The sound cracked across the store and in the soda back doorway. Two customers near the soda cooler turned. Lydia realized too late that she had made herself visible. My cheek and nodded once, as if she had signed a receipt. Thank you, I said. Her face went pale. Fornlert house. For what? What? She backed away, shaking. You are not my husband. Not anymore. She left with every eye following her. Marcy came to the counter slowly. You okay? But my cheek burned. Not from pain, from confirmation. The first fall was no longer Victor's alone. Lydia had stepped onto the stage herself. That night, after we closed, Marcy placed a clean sheet of paper in the typewriter and said, you need a lawyer. I need several. You know one? In the old timeline, yes. She gave me a look. I had slipped. There was no taking it back entirely. So I said, there's a lawyer in Cleveland named Ruth Delaney for Sal and Lost, Sal, and small business filings. In 12 years, she'll be the most commercial litigator in the state. Marcy stared at me. You say things like that sometimes. My Sal, I know. Are you insane? Less than I should be. She waited. I could have lied. I could have called it intuition, research, a hunch. But Marcy had risked herself for my records. Like coin. She had earned something better than fog. I lived this life once, I said, for it. Badly. Victor and Lydia were there. The typewriter keys sat silent beneath her fingers. Aun Asim lied. Outside, a truck rolled down the wet street. Tires. Hissing against pavement. Marcy did not laugh. She did not ask if I was drunk. Then lost. She looked toward the safe, then toward the Polaroids, then toward the ledgers stacked by date. Then we make sure they can't burn the records. That was when I knew she was the right person to trust. Not because she believed impossible things easily, Fauner. Because she understood the practical response to them. By Monday, Ruth Delaney had my first retainer. The spend was painful on paper, $500. The return was beautiful in gold. Ruth arrived the following Thursday in a beige sedan with rust over one wheel and a briefcase older than she was, for Fiesta. Of men underestimating her before she spoke. My first life, I had seen her on television after she dismantled a utility monopoly in court. Now she stood in my back room, reading Victor's invoices while Marcy poured coffee. This is sloppy. Victor's fraud? Your vulnerability. I liked her immediately. She flipped another page. The overcharges and matter. The break-in matters, but it's smoke. It's smoke. The bank loan attempt is interesting if we can show coordination. Frust. Tamtown involvement is personal, unless tied to business harm. Lydia was still my wife. Hearing Ruth say it made the word feel like a liability on a balance sheet. What do you recommend? I asked. Stop reacting. Create a transaction he cannot resist, document every step, and let him interfere. Marcy smiled faintly. Ruth noticed. You already had that idea. Something like it, I said. The opportunity came from Miller's supermarket. Their construction delay hit the local paper on Friday. Found Mitts disputed. Opening pushed from November to February. Heiningsaustet. In the old life, I had not understood what that meant. I had been too buried under Victor's debt to use the gap. This time, I saw 6 months of oxygen. I moved immediately. Whitaker Purchasing Company announced a regional winter stock program for small merchants. Bulk canned goods, batteries, kerosene heaters, flour, blankets, powdered milk, and basic medicines. A receive and loss tracing south. Participatings could place small orders through my larger purchase pool and receive better pricing than Victor offered, and assemble the souse. And force and lost. The business Victor had pretended to offer me. Except without the poison. Force south. Frushway, 8 merchants signed. Letters of intent. By the end of the month, there were 17. I spent money like a man, building a bridge while enemies argued over whether the river existed. Truck leases. Warehouse rent outside town. Legal fees. Accountings. Supplies. Fuel. Advertising. Telephone lines. Filing cabinets. A used forklift that coughed smoke, but lifted pallets like a stubborn mule. Every receipt became gold. Every gold sale became expansion. Every expansion became credibility. Fast. Crutchet. And credibility was the one currency. Victor could not print. The first time I saw real fear on his face, we were in the warehouse. It had once been a feed storage building, long and drafty, with a tin roof and concrete floor. By September, it held stacked flour, canned peaches, lantern batteries, blankets, soap, diapers, kerosene cans, and cases of powdered milk. Nothing glamorous. Nothing. Victor could mock without mocking the whole county's needs. Franklin Pierce. And two men I did not know. They stopped at the open bay door, staring at the inventory. Victor recovered quickly. Prestive Cal. Dangerous, though. Taking on obligations you may not understand. I stood beside Ruth Delaney, Marcy, and Mr. for Alvarez, who now managed repairs for our coolers and trucks. Pierce looked at Ruth and clearly disliked finding a lawyer there. Victor walked between the pallets, reading labels. You know, supply chains are delicate. One delayed shipment, one bad batch, one creditor panic, and all these little stores blaming you? That could bury a man, Ruth said. Was that business advice or a threat? Victor smiled. Observation. Wrote it down. His eyes flicked to her notebook. That was his mistake. He showed irritation too quickly. He knew now that paper followed him when he spoke. Pierce cleared his throat. Has concerns about rapid, unsupervised expansion in this market. I don't bank through county trust for this operation. No, Pierce said, but several of your participating merchants do. There it was. The stronger antagonist had noticed. Feastes, Indo. Invoices. Pierce could squeeze credit across the county. He could make my partners nervous, freeze small lines, call loans, whisper in instability into every ear that owed his bank money and the chaos. In my first life, I had thought bankers were background characters. Now I understood Pierce was not Victor's tool. He was Victor's ceiling from Isan and Ender. And ceilings existed to keep men like me from rising too high. I walked to a pallet of kerosene heaters and rested my hand on the shrink wrap. Then your bank should be happy their businesses are preparing for winter. Pierce's smile had no warmth. Set. Prepare extension is not. Victor picked up a can of peaches and turned it in his hand. People trust too easily when they're scared, he said. Friends sign for it. They might believe a man can offer miracles just because he suddenly has cash. Nobody can explain. The warehouse seemed to tighten. Marcy stopped writing. Ruth's eyes moved to me for half a second. Not theft. Vandalism. Suspicion. Victor could not see the system, but he could smell impossibility. A small store owner did not grow this fast. A poor husband did not lawyers, rent warehouses, and move inventory without a source. If he could not find the gold, he would make the gold itself dangerous. Pierce placed funds attract attention, Mr. Whitaker. Criminal attention. For the first time in weeks, real danger touched the room, headed in the south. Not because I was guilty of theft. Menacing, who could not explain miracles. The system had given me power, but not a public story large enough to hold it. Saw my silence and smiled. Was your business, he said softly. I thought of the fire and 17 cents over my dying body. I thought of every receipt in our cabinets. Every gold sale laundered through legitimate dealers, but still strange in volume. Every cash purchase that looked bold because it was backed by something no law could categorize. Then I smiled back. Still don't understand. His eyes narrowed. I walked to Marcy and took the notebook from her hands. Then I tore out the top sheet, placed it on a crate between us, and wrote one sentence. Pierce. Victor Hale and Franklin Pierce, and raised concerns about unexplained funds in front of witnesses. I signed it. Then I slid it to Ruth. She signed. Marcy signed. From Halden, signed after Ruth looked at him. Pierce's face darkened. Victor gave a short laugh. What? A receipt for your threat. Ruth capped her pen. A contemporaneous memorandum. Marcy added quietly. Those age well. Victor threw the can of peaches back onto the pallet, hard enough to dent it. And in short, loss. Ow. I did not know exactly how yet, but I had learned to keep objects, frost, and placed it on my office shelf beside the first diner receipt, Earl's Polaroids, and the unsigned bank refusal note. A can of peaches, a slap witnessed by a poisoned contract. Small things. Small money south. Small records. That was where Victor had begun killing me. Frost stayed. That was where I would begin burying him. By October, Pierce struck first. 3 participating merchants called me within the same afternoon. Firsting agent. One was asked why they had committed to Ost and outside purchasing arrangements. Another was warned that inventory speculation could affect lending confidence. Fun and lost. I lev and salad. The third who ran a gas station near the county line. I lost. Drove to my warehouse personally and placed his cap in both hands like he had come to a funeral. Calvin, I don't want to pull out, he said, but counting to trust my trust. I poured him coffee in the warehouse office, while Marcy sat beside the filing cabinet, listening without pretending not to. How much do you owe? He looked ashamed. 8,400 left. In my first life, that number would have been a mountain. Now I saw it as terrain. If your loan was pencil or silt, Pierce still control you? Harold frowned. What other lender? Me. Marcy's pencil stopped. Harold looked at me as if I had offered to buy the moon. Can extend secured bridge financing. Ruth will draft it clean. Fair interest. You keep buying through the clauses. You keep buying through the pool. Question. You stop answering owns your lungs. Harold's mouth opened and closed. I can't ask you to do that. You didn't. The spend required to fund Harold's refinance would be enormous. The return would be monstrous, but the better profit was strategic. Every loan bought out from under county trust weakened Pierce. Every merchant freed from his pressure became more loyal to me than a discount could ever make them. Marcy waited until Harold left, dazed and hopeful, before she spoke. Flared war on a bank. No, I said. Floor? They declared war when they thought only they could lend money. That evening, Lydia came to the warehouse. She had not visited before. Feared Sal lost him. But she entered carefully, heels clicking against concrete, eyes moving over the inventory with a calculation she did not bother hiding. I was alone in the office, frowning for it. Marcy to live, document loth. The timing was not accidental. Lydia closed the door behind her. Heshaw stand and nod. The words should have hurt. They did not. Felt arriving on time. All right. She blinked. She had expected begging. Half the marital assets. Frassaus. A fair share of whatever this is. She gestured toward the warehouse. This belongs to the company. You are the company. Not exactly. Her eyes sharpened. Foss. I think you should be careful who teaches you legal strategy, Victor says. I laughed once. She stopped. The sound surprised both of us. Haven't learned. Every time you say his name, you lower your own price. Her face twisted. You arrogant little shopkeeper. There she was again. I firelight and Noah's spouse. I firelight. She stepped closer. You think a few pallets make you powerful? Franson. Franklin knows bankers. I know what kind of husband you were. Ferratic. Sleeping at the store. Spending money we didn't have. Bringing that waitress into your back room at night. I understood then. She was not only leaving Frost from it. She was stable husband. Suspicious funds. Izanting and lost relationship. Reckless business activity. Maybe abuse if she cried hard enough. Maybe hidden assets if Pierce helped trace deposits without context. This was the Part 3 attack, arriving early, dressed as marriage. For a moment, my control slipped. Fist, nah. Because Victor had learned from the break-in that physical attacks created witnesses. And Pierce had learned from the warehouse that direct threats became records. So now they would attack the one place where truth often drowned in emotion. Reputation. She saw my face and smiled. There he is, she whispered. The scared man I married. The office door opened behind her. Marcy stepped in with Ruth Delaney. Lydia turned. So fast, one heel skidded. Ruth looked at me. Asked 30. We're early. I looked at the wall clock. 6:18. From a Assad. Wearing a beige coat, Lydia recovered, but not fully. Good, she said. A lawyer should hear this. I want my fair share. Ruth placed her briefcase on the desk. Mrs. Whitaker, I cannot advise you in several business entities connected to him, but I can tell you not to make threats in a warehouse office without counsel present. I didn't threaten anyone. Marcy held up the small tape recorder I had bought for Pat's incitation 3 days earlier. Lydia's eyes went to it. Color. It had not been no. That. Her face lost color. Fraught. Ruth obtained counsel. Lydia looked at me with pure hatred. Victor had taught her strategy, but not discipline. For Hostrad, hatred made people loud. Loud made records. She left with her pride damaged and her plan exposed. For it. Still, after she was gone, I did not celebrate. Ruth shut the door and said, "She's going to be a problem." She already was. No. Now she's organized. Sal. Marcy set the documents down. Frost. Pierce, Sal, Ruth said. They'll attack source of funds, mental assets, marital and business credibility at the smart. At the same time, if they're smart. I looked out over the warehouse. Rows of supplies waited under fluorescent lights. Food, fuel, blankets, practic preserving things. Fast to sound. The sort of inventory people respected only when storms came. What do we need? I asked. Ruth answered first. Clean corporate structure. Marcy said, a cleaner books than a hospital floor. I said. A public win too big to question. Neither. Ruth slowly smiled. Then, what kind of public win? I thought of winter, frost. I thought of Miller's delay. I thought of county trust squeezing merchants. I thought of Victor's dented can of peaches sitting on Seth's shelf. And I thought of the one thing every small town respected more than money. Rescue. The chance arrived 2 weeks later when the earlies hit. It came hard and mean. With ice on the roads and blackouts across 3 counties, power lines snapped beneath frozen branches. Trucks stalled. Miller's construction site shut down. Fruster and lot. Victor's supply trucks got stranded outside Columbus because he had consolidated his shipments to save costs and impress larger buyers. But my warehouse was full. Not because I was generous. Fell lost. In the first life, I had watched customers fight over the last batteries and kerosene. I had run out by the second day. Fest. And lost. Victor had tripled prices on emergency goods. Pierce had quietly extended high-interest credit to merchants, desperate to restock. Everyone called it market reality. This time, Whitaker Purchasing released emergency stock at normal prices. Batteries, headers, canned food, powdered milk, kerosene vouchers, elderly resident. No price gouging. Receipts for every sale, signatures for every delivery. The local paper came on day 2. Ruth stood beside me and made sure I said nothing stupid and something fry. Marcy stood inside the warehouse office, moss-assed, with the ledgers open, directing volunteers like she had been in Born, holding a clipboard. Mrs. Donnelly told the reporter, her receipts like the Lord keeps sins. By day 3, Frost asked Commissioner. Called to ask whether Whitaker Purchasing could coordinate emergency distribution to 2 neighboring towns. The spend exploded. Fuel, driver wages, emergency repairs, bulk food warehouse heating, volunteer meals, hens, while, phone charges, truck chains, cash advances. Gold returned faster than I could safely liquidate it. But public trust returned faster than gold. Hanless. And trust did something gold could not. It made accusations look jealous. On the 4th night of the freeze, Victor walked into the warehouse while 50 people were waiting for heater vouchers. His coat was immaculate. His expression was not. Behind him came a reporter. Two merchants I recognized as holdouts from his network. And Franklin Pierce. Performance. Again, only had chosen the wrong stage. Far it. Victor raised his voice enough for the line to hear. Calvin, people are asking questions. Conversations stopped. A baby cried near the door. Fringham South. Up. From the voucher table. Ruth, who had been reviewing emergency distribution sheets, closed her folder. Victor continued. Nobody wants to interfere with charity. But when one man suddenly controls emergency goods across the county, with vulnerable people depending on him, transparency matters, Pierce added, especially when participating merchants may be financially exposed. The reporter lifted his pen. There it was. The trap. All with little to show for it. If I got dodged, I looked guilty. If I explained the gold, I sounded insane. For the first time since waking in the diner, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. They had waited until my public trust became public dependence. Then they attacked the source. Town loss. Not in a bank office. Not in private. In front of cold families who needed me to be clean. Frustin Houts. Ruth's face stayed calm, but her fingers tightened around her pen. Victor saw the pause and smiled. Hasher, for it. You can clear this up right now, he said. The warehouse waited. I thought of lying, private investor, speculation, coin sale, all partly usable, none large enough. Each would create cracks. Pierce knew that. Victor knew that. Lydia had probably helped them count my visible life and conclude the math did not fit. Damn Lacheyette. Then my eyes landed on the shelf office behind them. The dented can of peaches, the diner receipt, flan and sow. Never save pennies for people who plan to burn you. I had been thinking too much about explaining the miracle and laud. I needed to explain the business. I stepped onto an overturned milk crate so everyone could see me. I left in South, I said. A few people frowned. Victor laughed softly. It is if you understand turnover. I looked at the reporter. Write this down carefully. Frustin Hopleys. Whitaker purchasing prepaid, discounted surplus inventory, leased equipment. Pooled, small merchant orders. Sold essential goods at stable margins. Free and soused. Refinanced. Predatory where necessary. And documented every transaction. Pierce said, that does not explain the scale. No, it explains why you're frightened by it. A murmur moved through the line. I pointed toward Harold Finch, who stood near the kerosene vouchers. Mr. Finch, when County Trust you joined our purchasing pool, did Whitaker Purchasing offer you a clean refinance? Harold swallowed, then nodded. Yes. Lower interest, yes. Any hidden prepayment penalty? No. I pointed to Mrs. Donnelly, a four-head boss, who heard the vandals mention Mr. Hale. Victor snapped. This is absurd. Mrs. Donnelly raised her chin. I did. I pointed to Marcy. How many Victor invoices before I'd ended business with him? Marcy's voice carried clear across the warehouse. 17 documented irregularities from September through February, escalating in amount. The reporter's pen moved faster. Pierce stepped forward. Anecdotes do not. Ruth cut in. County Trust Bank, through Vice President Pierce, communicated credit concerns to multiple merchants after they joined Mr. Fenlamorta. Whitaker's purchasing program. We have written statements. Would you like those names printed too? Pierce stopped. Frustral. I looked at him, face hardened. You ask where the money came from. Because you want people to believe money is only clean when it passes through men like you. His smile disappeared. I reached into my coat and pulled out the dented can of peaches. People stared. Victor stared too. You damaged about delayed shipments and creditors. Did panic, I said. I saw. It was a small thing. So small most men would throw it away. I turned the can so the dent faced the reporter. I loaned Allard a few dollars on an invoice, a friendly loan clause, but Uslock, a delayed credit renewal. A rumor about cash for South. A wife pushed into making accusations. A condented while you threaten a man in front of witnesses. Lydia's name did not need to be spoken fully. The implication moved faster than detail. Victor's eyes went flat. You better be careful. I smiled. There it is, I said. The reporter looked up. Ruth said, please note Mr. Hale's response. The warehouse changed. No one cheered. No one gasped for Auntameld. People who had been uncertain became attentive. People who had feared my unexplained rise now remembered Victor's familiar pressure. Past. Pierce's polished authority began to look less like caution and more like control. Victor knew it. Pierce knew it. Frust, he said. County Trust will be reviewing all financial relationships connected to this operation. Harold Finch. Review mine first. Then explain why you squeezed me. When I tried to buy cheaper canned beans, a woman from the bait shop said, for joining the pool. Another merchant said, Victor told me my deliveries would get delayed if I bought through Calvin. Voices rose, and a Sayman some farms south, not a mob. The reporter could barely keep up. Victor stepped toward me, forgetting the audience for one fatal second. You think these people will protect you? He hissed. They'll turn on you the moment they smell smoke. Smoke. For one heartbeat, I was back on the stockroom floor. Loss. Gasoline in my mouth. Lydia's perfume above me. Victor's laughter behind the fire. My hand tightened around the can until the dent pressed into my palm. Tester intown. Marcy stepped closer, but not because I was calm. Because I had learned what to do with fire for it. Said softly enough that only the front rows heard, lost, inner soused this time. I keep extinguishers. Then I turned to the reporter. You wanted transparency. Come tomorrow morning. Fark and Lock in South. Ruth will provide access to our purchasing records, emergency distribution sheets, and merchant statements. Print all of it, including the pressure from County Trust and Victor Hale's irregular invoices. Ruth nodded once. Fark and South. Then understood. Full exposure was dangerous, but controlled exposure was stronger than rumor. Pierce understood too. Half in little de Showwall. He said, I lost some sals. No, I said, you'll regret assume fierce stay close. That line landed in Pierce's eyes, in the reporter's sudden stillness. Because I had said more than I should have. Not publicly. I said it strategically. I had signaled I was coming for the bank. Victor and Pierce left without another word. But as they reached the bay door, Lydia appeared outside in a dark coat, framed by the freezing night. She had heard enough across the warehouse. And for the first time since my rebirth, she did not look angry. She looked afraid, satisfied me. Instead, it warned me. Afraid people ran. Cornered people negotiated. But guilty people with nowhere clean left to stand reached for matches. And the warehouse emptied. Marcy found me standing beneath the office shelf, staring at the dented can of peaches. I shook my head. No, and lost. Today they learned they can't beat me with rumors. What does that leave? I looked toward the dark windows facing the alley, evidence they create themselves. A sound came from outside. Not glass, not footsteps. A car engine idling without lights. Marcy's face tightened. From the office phone, Ruth called the sheriff before I told her to. I walked to the bay door and looked through the narrow penalost. Across the frozen yard behind the warehouse fence, a shadow moved near the fuel drums. Frost sound. Gasoline. My mouth filled with the taste of my own death. But this time, the warehouse lights were on. This time, witnesses were awake for Foms and Souse. Assets. This Tamers waited in the dark because I had paid Mr. Alvarez to install them after Earl kicked my back door. And this time, Victor Hale had no idea the whole yard was already watching him burn himself. Frowned south. That was the first difference between the man who had died and the man who had returned. The old Calvin would have rushed out with a bat and rage, desperate to stop the fire before it became real. Some sounds, sums. Easy to blame. Easy to kill. He would dip to courage, stepping into danger the second it appeared. This Calvin stood still in the slit of shadow behind the metal door and watched the two figures move near the fuel drums. Frasiv Kinsaft. One was tall, shoulder wrapped in a dark wool coat, Victor. The other was smaller, hood pulled low, hands shaking as they turned the cap on a red gasoline can. Lydia South. Some wounded, stupid piece of me wanted her not to be there. Even after the fire from Law. Even after the threats and the affair and the planned theft of my life. I wanted the universe to leave me one cleaner memory of the woman I had once married. Then she poured gasoline across the frozen ground, and that Mercy died. Fed. Marcy stood behind me, white-faced, one hand pressed over her mouth. Ruth held the phone receiver in one hand and her pen in the other, because even while calling the sheriff, she was taking notes. Mr. Falmos, ready to flood the yard with light. On the office desk, the tape recorder turned silently and shone lot, catching through the cracked window I had left open. For exactly this possibility, Henderson. I had spent $11 on extra tape reels, extension cords, and weatherproof covers for the cameras, Frustum South. But the true return was standing outside with a gasoline can in her hands. Victor's voice carried thinly through the cold. Fast. Higher. It has to catch fast. Lydia whispered something I could not make out. Town Lothing. Victor snapped. Because that is what you get if his records survive. She flinched. There it was. Not loyalty. Leverage. Famine. Victor had pulled Lydia into the fire, not because he loved her, but because she was already tied to the crime. A guilty wife made a useful accomplice, a frightened accomplice, made a disposable witness, assassin. I watched him take the can from her and splash gasoline along the base of the door. The smell reached me. My lungs locked. The warehouse vanished. I was back on the stockroom floor, cheek against hot tile, ribs broken. Receipt burning on my chest, Lydia's white coat above me. A sound nor it. Victor's amused to be useful. The fire crawling closer, patient and bright. A sound escaped my throat, touched my sleeve. Her voice pulled down the back, not away from fear, far-fied and south. Dot, frusting, souse. He threw the breaker. The yard exploded with white light. Flood lamps mounted along the roof line snapped on all at once, turning the frozen gravel silver and the gasoline trail into a shining scar. Victor spun toward the light, still in his hand. Lydia stumbled backward, one gloved hand raised to shield her face. From the far corner of the lot, the first camera flash popped. It's in the third. Mr. had wired them to trip from the office switch. Crude and ugly and perfect. Not moving pictures. Not fancy surveillance. Timed. Just timed 3 times. With fresh Polaroid film, each aimed at the fuel drums, the loading door, and the fence gate. Victor understood before Lydia did. His face changed from anger to calculation to pure alarm. Cold air rushed in. South. For one breath, nobody moved. I stood in Marcy, with Marcy on my right, Ruth on my left, and half a county's in emergency supplies stacked behind me like a jury. Victor, I said. Lydia. Lydia dropped the small box of matches she had been holding. The sound was tiny. It might as well have been thunder. Victor recovered enough to laugh. Frustin. We saw someone near your fuel drums and came to check. The red gasoline can hung from his hand. Gasoline dripped from its spout onto his polished shoe. Had to not move. Not, I souse. The sheriff is on his way. He looked at her with hatred, so sharp, it should have cut the air. You think this proves anything? No, I said. It records everything. His eyes flicked to the cameras. Hal with little stared to show for it. Her lips trembled, but no tears came. She had used too many. The body has limits, even for liars. Calvin, she said. Victor made me. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, Frustin South. Because even at the edge of the second fire, Victor turned on her instantly. Shut your mouth. And there it was again. Hierarchy beneath the affair. He did not love her. He managed her. Frosts, press, vandals, bankers, press, frightened merchants. And me. Lydia heard it too. Something broke in her face. Victor did not look at her. Be quiet. You said. Once the warehouse was gone. The books were gone, and Pierce could make the rest look criminal. Ruth's pen moved so fast it scratched. Victor lunged toward Lydia. I stepped down from the dock before I did not have to touch him. Sheriff Nolan's siren cut across the yard, then another. Mrs. Foss. Before Ruth finished calling the sheriff, lights were turning on in houses beyond the fence. Curtains shifted. Doors opened. People came out in coats and slippers because fire was everybody's business in a town built from wood, debt, and memory. Victor stopped, Frustin. His hand tightened around the gasoline can. For the first time, I saw him with no prepared line left. Nolan's cruiser slid to a stop by the gate, followed by 2 volunteer fire trucks and Harold Finch's pickup. Sheriff Orff climbed out slowly, his face grim beneath the flashing red lights. He looked at Victor, at Lydia, at the gasoline trail, at the matches on the ground, at me, standing dry and waiting inside the warehouse. Then he sighed like a man whose easy excuses had finally run out. Sheriff put the can down. Victor smiled, but the shape was wrong. Sheriff, this is a misunderstanding. Nolan looked at Lydia. She was shaking so violently her teeth clicked. Faust. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, you want to explain why you are standing beside gasoline and matches outside your husband's warehouse. Lydia's eyes went to Victor. He gave the smallest shake of his head and asked, final mistake with her. Lydia had betrayed me for wealth, comfort, and status. But beneath all that, she had one pure instinct stronger than love or greed, preservation. He planned it, she said. Victor closed his eyes, for side in hand. Spouse side. Lydia pointed at him with a trembling hand. He said the warehouse had to burn before the reporter came back for the records. Frank Samsaurit. He said Franklin could raise questions about the money afterward. He said if the business collapsed, Calvin would look desperate, and I could claim he destroyed the warehouse himself to hide fraud. Pierce. She had said Franklin. Ruth looked at me once. There was the stronger antagonist's fingerprint. Victor threw the gasoline can at the ground, with a hollow metal clang, splashing fuel over his shoe in the gravel. "You stupid woman," he said. Lydia began crying then, but now the tears were real. Falnafor. Nolan moved forward with his hand on his sidearm. "Victor Hale, turn around." Victor looked at the sheriff, then at the gathering. Witnesses, then at me. The hatred in his eyes was almost peaceful, like he had set down every disguise and felt lighter without them. "You still don't understand what you're touching," he said. I was the friendly version. Nolan seized his wrist for it. Victor did not resist. Not because he was defeated, because he was already thinking beyond the arrest. Lydia collapsed onto the frozen ground as another deputy took her by the arms. Her knees landed inches from the matches she had dropped. She looked up at me as if I had placed them there. "Calvin," she sobbed, "please." In my first life, that word would have moved me. In this life, I remembered her reading the receipt on my chest. "You were easier to love when I was weak," I said. Crying hitched. I stepped closer, stopping just beyond the gasoline trail. "Now you can love Victor's lawyer." The deputy pulled her to her feet. Crowd murmured. Small towns rarely applauded destruction. They inhaled it, stored it, and retold it at breakfast for the next 20 years. As Victor was guided toward the cruiser, he turned his head. "You think this ends with me?" "No," I said. "I think you finally became useful." His eyes narrowed. I smiled. "That was your only talent." For the first time, I returned his line. Fras en la langre. In a lit yard, surrounded by witnesses, with his hands being cuffed behind his back, his face changed. First, not the arrest. Not the photographs. Frenaloff. The line. The moment he understood, I remembered something he had never said in this life. Fear touched him then. Real fear. The kind that looked past prison and saw a locked room with no map. The sheriff took them away before dawn. Nobody slept. Firefighters spread absorbent sand over the gasoline, collected the Polaroids with hands gentle enough for holy relics. Ruth labeled every image, every statement, every physical object, including the matches, the can, the fuel-stained gravel sample, and the tape reel from the office recorder, Finge in the Souse. At 7:30, the reporter arrived expecting accounting records and found attempted arson. By noon, the whole county had the story. By evening, the state police had questions. Because the warehouse supported emergency distribution across multiple towns and burning it during a declared freeze response. Crossed lines Victor had not considered. By the next morning, Franklin Pierce took a sudden leave of absence from county trust. That was not victory. That was smoke leaving the chimney. Ruth warned me immediately. "Pierce is cutting distance," she said. Fast. We sat in the warehouse office with coffee that tasted like burnt penny sauce. Marcy had not gone home, first and her men's. Mr. Alvarez slept on a folded blanket near the heater. Outside, volunteers moved emergency stock into trucks because the freeze had not ended simply because my enemies had been arrested. Festi. That was what made revenge complicated. People still needed diapers while you were hunting a banker. What can touch Pierce? Documents. Recorded instructions. For our souse. Bank communications, a wit inside the county trust. Proof he used lending pressure to interfere with your contracts. Something linking him to last night would be strongest. "Not yet," Ruth said. Marcy looked up from the ledger. "Lydia might." I shook my head. "She'll protect herself, not us." Ruth nodded. "If Pierce becomes more dangerous to her than Victor." "She talks." I knew Lydia. She would say, whatever saved Lydia. The safest product on the shelf. We did not have to wait long. The following afternoon, her lawyer called Ruth for Nyan Nor. Not because conscience woke, because Victor's lawyer had visited her first. Fade. To Lydia, Victor planned to claim she had orchestrated the arson out of jealousy, that she had lured him there, that he had tried to stop her from burning my warehouse, and got trapped by to sound like him. It was shameless enough to sound like him. Ruth arranged a formal statement with her counsel present. Frustin lost. Not because I was noble. Because if I heard Lydia describe the fire again, I was not sure I could keep my face empty. Marcy went instead, as records custodian with Ruth. When they returned, Marcy placed a folder on my sex and stood there without speaking. I opened it. Parnatas. Dates. Meetings. Phone calls. Pierce's name. Victor's instructions. A dinner at country per that my person company's fundings source could be framed as suspicious if needed. A bank memo Lydia had seen in Victor's briefcase, and most importantly, a letter, a carbon copy. Victor had kept it because arrogant men like souvenirs. Foss. The letter because frightened women like insurance. The letter was from Franklin Pierce to Victor Hale, written 3 days before the freeze. It did not say burn the warehouse, from Loth. If Whitaker's records and inventory integrity become compromised before external review, his credibility collapses, and county trust can position itself as necessary stabilizing authority for exposed merchants is essential. Ruth read the line 3 times. Then she said, beautiful. Marcy looked sick. Festened. Word. In law, Ruth said, beautiful often means someone was arrogant in writing. Pierce had believed distance protected him. He wrote, like a banker, not a criminal. But criminals with fountain pens still left ink. The next step was not dramatic, it was paperwork. Ruth filed motions, notified participating merchants, and prepared a civil action for tortious interference, conspiracy, and damages. Frussat and Lawsath. I had built. Because now that Pierce was exposed, county trust would protect itself like a wounded animal. That meant spending more money. Lawyers, accountants, independent audits, security, insurance reviews, additional warehouse sites, new bank relationships outside the county, fair and straight. For large cash movements, safe deposit boxes, fire suppression upgrades, feeing payroll systems. A proper orth, the numbers grew so large that the old Calvin inside me occasionally woke screaming. Then bar after bar, coin after coin. Frusted, its interior becoming deeper than its exterior. 4. The system was calmly building a treasury behind reality, and unlost. Exceeded anything I could have earned in 20 honest lifetimes, but I had learned not to worship the gold. Gold was Matesh Emperor. Olper aimed it. Paper aimed it. I left and lost. By the end of November, the public investigation had split the county into factions. Frustine. Victor claimed innocence from jails, from the first break-in, accepted plea deals, and confirmed he had paid them. Lydia's statement tied him to the warehouse arson attempt. The photographs made him look exactly as guilty as he was. Sal. He became toxic, fast. County Trust announced an internal review and described his letter as poorly phrased risk analysis. He resigned for personal reasons before the board could fire him. Ida loss, Ninon loss, and loss, loss, door. Ruth saw the trap. They want to sacrifice Pierce as an individual and deny institutional responsibility, she said. If everyone gets tired, can they? Yes, if everyone got tired easily. Emergencies ended. Newspapers moved on. Fiend a ost. Merchants returned to invoices. Outrage cooled faster than soup. So we created a reason not to get tired. On December 1st, Whitaker Purchasing Company hosted a public merchant meeting at the town hall. Not a rally, a restructuring. Frusting. We announced a cooperative merchants became 30 council, transparent pricing sheets, independent audits, and a winter credits fund for small businesses targeted by retaliatory lending pressure. Ruth explained the legal protections, format, some present, and last. How refinancing had saved his gas station from county trust pressure. I stood last, format. I did not speak long. Long speeches. I trying to fill empty rooms. I held up the first receipt from the diner. Half. This was the first receipt I kept. When I decided my life had to change, I said. People leaned forward. Fern crayoned. Death. I did not tell them about gold light. I did not tell them that a version of me had burned, while Lydia laughed and Victor stole the ledger. I told them the safer truth. And I used to think small numbers were small. A few cents overcharged, Penner sassed. A few days of delayed credit, a small penalty clause, a quiet threat, a broken window. I thought those things were too small to fight. Men like Victor Hale and Franklin Pierce counted on that. The hall was silent. I placed the receipt on the podium. They used small things to build cages. Fat. We are going to use small things build doors. That line made the front page. The next week, 3 more merchants joined. The week after that, a church pantry asked for purchasing support. Les Whitaker Purchasing Company had become too useful to quietly destroy. That was when the genuine setback arrived. Not fire, a federal to inquiry. Fessing. It requested documentation regarding substantial cash transactions, precious metal sales, business capitalization, and possible underreported gains. I read it once, for Reen Faust. And Sal felt the room tilt. This was the danger I had known existed, but could not outrun forever, for chaos. Without mint, history, or taxable origin, in any ordinary sense, selling it created records. Depositing cash created questions. Thrust from Shao. I had documented everything after the gold entered the visible world, but before that there was a miracle-shaped hole no ledger could fill, and Endon lost. Victor and Pierce had failed to burn the records, but they had taught the right people to ask where the firewood came from. Ruth arrived within an hour and did not soften it. This is serious. Marcy stood by the filing cabinet, arms folded tight. Can we answer? Can we answer? Partly, Ruth said. Frass. We have coin dealer receipts, deposits, purchases, inventory movement, tax estimates, and merchant costs, contracts. What we don't have is a conventional explanation for the original gold. The word conventional carried a roomful of knives. I looked at Marcy. She knew the impossible truth. Ruth did not, though by then I suspected she had guessed. There was something beyond private family coins. How bad? I asked. If handled badly. Asset freezes. Criminal suspicion. Collapse of confidence. Every enemy you have will crawl out smiling. There it was. Something important nearly lost. Not money. Legitimacy. Sast and Beanson lost and not buy. Trust, if the government labeled me a fraud. For the first time, the system felt less like a gift I had been feeding without knowing where the smoke went. That night, I opened the black safe and stared at the gold until my eyes hurt. The system letters appeared. Current reserve available. Would host Like to convert storage configuration. No. The letters waited. I spoke again. Sharper. I need records. New function unavailable. I laughed. Bitter and small. Of course. It did not solve consequences. It did not forge histories. I left did immune. Greed or suspicion, it gave me power and left wisdom. Optional. The old Calvin had died because he was too afraid to spend. Phi. This Calvin might lose everything because everything had is south. Marcy found me there near midnight. She did not look at the gold anymore with fear. She looked at it like a dangerous machine. She had decided to operate anyway. You need to stop selling it for now, she said. I know. We need another source of visible capital. I know. Not fake, not backdated. Real. I know. She stepped closer. Then buy something that makes money without needing a miracle. I turned, Sade and lie. She placed 3 folders on the tank's fit. The first was a distressed cold storage facility. 2 counties over, owned by a retiring family, and losing money because they could not afford repairs. The second was a trucking company with 5 vehicles, 2 good routes, and a tax lien. Frust and loss. The third was a vacant grain mill connected to rail access, ignored because everyone thought it was obsolete. I've been looking, she said. If we acquire distressed assets at fair documented prices, repair them, and run them, the future cash flow explains future growth. For and soust. But it gives us a bridge. I opened the folders slowly. This was why Marcy mattered. Fander. She built stairs around it. Ruth liked the plan enough to make it harsher. We disclose precious metal sales properly. She taxes aggressively, even where classification is uncertain. We hire independent auditors. We create documented operating revenue. We reduce reliance on gold liquidation. And if investigators ask about the original source, we provide the truth we can support. Private precious metal holdings. Liquidated through dealers. Will that be enough? Ruth looked at me for a long moment. I don't know. Honesty was more frightening than confidence. For 3 weeks, my world became audits, sorted by date. Dealer statements verified. Cash deposits matched. Inventory purchases reckons documented. Payroll corrected where my early habits had been too informal. Trusted. Corporate minutes drafted. Asset acquisitions reviewed. I had the gold still whenever I spent, but I stopped treating that as profit. It became reserve, hidden, and heavy. While visible businesses had to stand on visible legs. The setback cost me speed. It cost me sleeps. It cost me the illusion that revenge was a straight road. Meanwhile, Pierce moved. Not publicly. Not loudly. He filed no lawsuit. Fan Townsend tasked. Vendors requested stricter terms. Frost South. A regional bank that delayed my account review. A rumor spread that Federal were preparing to seize Whitaker assets. 2 merchants paused orders. Frost. Returned to Victor's old network, now operated by a cousin with a cleaner name. Pierce understood banking better than I did. He did not need to beat me in court if he could make everyone afraid to touch me. Frustin, the tax inquiry widened. They wanted to meeting inspect warehouse records in person. Ruth arranged the February 4th, 1981, at the cold storage facility we had just purchased and repaired. Frustal Frit. Not the old warehouse. A new arena, freshly painted office. And loss? Fear it. Refrigeration units humming with visible purpose. Trucks outside with Whitaker. Purchasing company, painted on the doors in clean blue letters. Fruffle and Habel and Marsu and Holmes sound. Growth. I would show them growth they could touch. The morning of the inspection, I wore a gray suit that still felt like someone else's skin. Marcy wore navy and carried 3 ledgers. Ruth wore black and looked like bad news had hired counsel. 2 federal agents arrived. One older, one young, polite, unsmiling. They asked about precious metal sales, capitalization, inventory financing, emergency distribution, merchant lending, and my relationship with County Trust. Fast. Not perfectly, carefully. I did not enjoy any of it. Near my throat, but as the hours passed, something shifted. Taxes paid, ad debts, out and lost, real customers, real goods, moving through real loading bays. The miracle remained unexplained at the root, but above it, we had built a forest of facts. Near the end, the older agent held up a file. Frustrated. Was a front for illegal liquidation of stolen bullion. There it was. Pierced his final trap. Ruth said, "May we see the complaint?" No. Then you understand our response is limited. The agent looked at me. Do you deny selling stolen bullion? Yes. Can you identify the source? Private holdings. Inherited? I paused. Ruth's shoe touched mine under the table. Do not decorate. Tapter when foul, a sap. I repeated. The agent watched my face. It was not enough. Then the office door opened. Harold Finch stepped in, despite the secretary trying to stop him. File hand. I'm sorry, he said, cap in hand. And he's from County Trust, and he's telling folks this place will be locked by sundown. Ruth's head turned. The older agent's eyes sharpened. What man? Harold looked at me. Franklin Pierce. For 1 second, the entire inspection room stopped breathing. Pierce had grown impatient, desperate. Either way, he had come to the arena himself. I stood slowly. Calvin, I know. Down the narrow through the office door and onto the loading floor. Pierce this the dock entrance, a dark overcoat, speaking to 2 merchants and one of my drivers. His face tightened when he saw the federal agents behind me. Cast. He found witnesses. Again, Vermont and lost. Approached him. Mr. Pierce? Pierce recovered quickly. Yes? I'm Agent Mallory. We're conducting a review inside. Are you here in an official capacity with County Trust Bank? Pierce glanced at me. Fatal pause. No, he said. Thrust eye. Personal capacity. Ruth's smile was almost invisible. Agent Mallory nodded. In your personal capacity, you're informing people this facility will be locked by sundown? I expressed concern based on community reports. Reports you filed. Pierce's mouth tightened. Frant. I saw the trap closing. Not because I had set all of it, but because men like Pierce could never resist acting like authority even after losing the title. He looked at me then, and for the first time, his polish cracked. Fraff. You think clean ledgers make you clean, he said. Ruth said, Mr. Pierce, I strongly recommend you stop talking. He ignored her. Trucks. And a small town hero story. Pierce said to the agents, voice rising. Ask him how a failed shopkeeper became a financier in 1 year. Ask him how many officials he bought with emergency supplies, all with little he learned to hide it. The loading floor went silent. There were workers above, on the mezzanine, drivers near the trucks, frustrated by the office. Federal agents at my side. The public climax had arrived wearing a banker's overcoat. I stepped closer. Franklin, I said, that if my records and inventory integrity became compromised before press inspection, County Trust could position itself as necessary stabilizing authority. His face went pale. Agent Mallory turned toward him. Pierce said, that is privileged business analysis. Ruth opened her folder. It was obtained from a private party in connection with an attempted arson investigation. We provided copies to state authorities. The young agent stopped writing and simply stared. Frust, sound loss. Pierce looked around the loading floor, suddenly aware that every had people near it, not blocking him, witnessing him. Fate. The same thing I had learned again and again. Records were not only paper. Sometimes records had eyes, the friendly and Norris. Pierce lowered his voice. I remembered Victor saying he was the friendly version. I remembered Lydia calling me weak. I'm the safe room, when the system would not give me the records I wanted. No, I said. For once, I know exactly what I'm spending. His eyes narrowed. It means I spent a year buying what you never thought poor people could afford. I pointed to Harold. Freedom from your loans. I pointed to Marcy. Books cleaner than your conscience. I pointed to Ruth. Hound lost. I pointed to the loading floor. Assets that make rumors look lazy. Then I pointed to the federal agents. And an audience you didn't know you were joining. Pierce's face hardened into something ugly. You're still a shopkeeper with unexplained gold. Yes, I said. And you're still a banker, explaining why your risk analysis keeps arriving beside arson, coercion, and witness intimidation. Agent Mallory stepped between us. Mr. Pierce will need you to remain available for questions. Pierce looked at the agent, then at me. For the first time, I saw the calculation fail. He had built his whole life on distance. Fourth, the match. Never say the threat plainly. Friend lost. While he wrote memoranda in clean offices. But I had dragged every small thing into the same room. The broken window, the irregular invoices, the delayed credit, the dented peaches, and the personal visit. Ursal, Ursas, and then fell and Lod. One thread was weak. Together, they made rope for us to leave. Agent Mallory said, "Not yet." The words were quiet. They hit like a vault door. Fun lost. By sunset, Pierce had been escorted out for formal questioning. Not arrested. Not yet. Rushing motion. They descended floor by floor, calling each landing temporary. But the inspection changed after that. Head south and south. The agents. They still requested more documents. They still cared about the gold. Frusted. That. Retaliation. That did not erase my burden. It gave my records a fighting chance. That no immediate enforcement action would be taken pending continued review and tax reconciliation. It was not innocence stamped in gold. I not to show for it. It was not the end. The setback had not destroyed us. Found. To souse. By March, Victor accepted a deal that named Pierce with lending pressure and the planned destruction of lending pressure and the planned destruction of business records. Lydia accepted a separate agreement and left town under a cloud so dark, even her beauty could not polish it. From Intowna. County Trust Board began moving accounts in groups. Then denial became settlement language. Pierce resigned from 3 boards, lost his bank position permanently, and discovered that men who weaponized reputation often owned nothing else. Still waited. Because Victor had one last card. Trial. High soused. He withdrew his plea before sentencing, claiming coercion. He alleged that I had framed him using planted evidence, manipulated Lydia, bribed witnesses with loans, and built Whitaker, purchasing with criminal gold. Pierce, facing his own investigation, first cessed in Litonis. To make the newspapers hungry again, cautioning in April. Hal defense questions Whitaker. Empire. Empire. The word looked strange in cheap ink. Marcy read over my shoulder. and swore, for the first time since I had known her. "They're trying to put you on trial inside his trial," she said. Nodded. "Yes. And if we are careless, it works." When, June, the arena became clear. A public hearing. Victor would act first. Friesline hound every suspicion into the air and hope the smoke looked like fire. This time, though, we had months to prepare. We did not build a defense at bank communications. Merchant statements, can lost, the phone records, insurance documents, Victor's supplier cont, analysis, county trust internal memos, Lydia's correspondence, Frustum's I.S. Earl's unrelated assault record, after Marcy finally filed charges using the old Polaroids as part of a pattern. Not because Earl mattered to Victor's case, but because Marcy had learned what records could do and decided her own life deserved them too. Frauenhaus. Investigators, accountants, document copying, travel, security, court filings. But I barely looked at it now. Revenge had matured from hunger into architecture. In May, I bought the building beside my original corner store. In June, I bought the rest of the block, quietly, through a properly formed holding company. Ruth controlled until closing. The block included my store, Mabor, the diner, or the print shop, and the small office Victor had used for Hale Distribution's local accounts. I did not buy it for pride. I bought it because the records showed Victor's company lease was expiring 1 week after the hearing. Men like Victor understood ownership when nothing else reached them. Frust mad. Where my second life had begun, Marcy stood beside me, holding a folder against her chest. She no longer flinched when trucks backfired. Fa. Earl had left town to assault and property damage. She had moved into a small apartment above the print shop, paid by her own wages, with 2 locks on the door and her name on the lease. "You okay?" she asked. I looked through the diner window at the booth where I had first seen the gold letters. "I keep thinking about breakfast. That sounds normal before court." It was $4.17. She smiled faintly. Business biscuits were too, also important. Ruth arrived behind us. "If you two are done discussing pastry strategy." The courthouse was packed. Victor had dressed carefully in navy, looking less like a criminal than a man disappointed by accusations. Lydia sat near the front with her lawyer, pale and rigid. Frost. Pierce sat behind his counsel in winter, his hair thinner, his mouth harder. When Victor saw me enter, he smiled, still performing. I had lost it, and still convinced the right audience could restore him. The hearing began with his lawyer attacking the investigation. He suggested evidence had been staged. First, he suggested Lydia had lied for favorable treatment. He suggested I had used suspicious wealth to influence merchants and witnesses. He never said gold like a fairy tale. Fav. He said unexplained precious metal liquidation to make it sound diseased. Victor watched the room while his lawyer spoke. He was not trying to prove innocence. Delas. He was trying to return doubt. Then Ruth stood. She did not shout. She began with the invoices. Small overcharges. From September through January. Not dramatic, but patterned. Then the contract loan clauses. Then the break-in, the Polaroids. Mrs. Pierce-Demoni Donnelly's testimonial. Pierce's memo, the Tarrant and Sound South. The photographs, the tape, statement. The federal complaint. Pierce's personal visit during the inspection. Small things. Each time, Victor's lawyer objected. Ruth narrowed the point until it slid through by afternoon. Then Ruth called Lydia. I did not look at her when she took the stand. I looked at Victor. At first, Lydia spoke carefully. Yes, she had an affair with Victor. Timeless. Yes. Victor wanted my records destroyed. Yes. Pierce had discussed timing and credibility. She carried matches to the warehouse. Yes. Victor poured gasoline. Victor stared at her as if hatred alone could strangle. Mrs. Whitaker, why did you participate? Lydia's lips trembled. Her lawyer leaned forward. I did some send and lost. Because I thought Calvin was weak, she said. The words entered me quietly. Ferning. Ow. No receipt. Burning. Stripped of decoration. I thought he would always forgive me, Lydia continued. Victor said men like Calvin only understood loss. After it was too late, I believed him. Ruth paused. And what do you believe now? Lydia looked at me. For the first time in either life, she did not ask me for anything. Frayden and weakness. Because weakness was easier to steal from. The courtroom was silent. Victor's jaw clenched. Ruth let the silence work. Say a stand voluntarily. But his memos did. His credit notes. His resignation document. Fangatter. His risk analysis. His storage facility. The young federal agent testified only to that encounter. Carefully, narrowly, devastatingly. By 4 in the afternoon, Victor's lawyer looked like a man trying to hold water in a torn bag. Frussum Sals. Against counsel's advice, he asked to speak. The judge warned him. He stood at the defense table, buttoned his jacket, and looked directly at me. Calvin Whitaker wants you to believe he is a humble merchant attacked by powerful men, he said, and lot. But ask yourselves one question. How does a man like him rise so fast? How does a corner shop become a financing company? A warehouse operator, a trucking buyer, a landlord, and a county hero in 1 year? Honest, does that sound like a lie big enough to hide inside good deeds? The courtroom shifted. Because it was a good question. Power and nary. The most dangerous lies always contained a real mysterier. Victor felt the shift and pushed harder because paper can be arranged. Frusta. He bought loyalty. People are cheap. He hid behind a woman lawyer, a battered waitress, and old people who liked his prices. And now he wants you to call envy what any sane man would call suspicion. Marcy's face went white. Ruth's eyes turned lethal. But I looked at Victor and understood something final. He still believed usefulness was shame. Asked. He still believed poor people, wounded old people, small merchants, clerks, drivers, and waitresses were props unless a man like him used them. That was why he had lost. Not because I had gold, because he could only count power. Ruth rose slowly. Your Honor, may Mr. Hanger ever briefly respond to the personal allegations directed at him? Victor's lawyer objected. The judge, visibly tired of everyone, allowed a limited response. I walked to the front, I said. I looked at the courtroom, then at Victor. You asked how I rose so fast, I said. Crassed. I'll answer. Ruth's head turned slightly. She did not know what I would say. Neither did I until the words arrived. Fine. I rose because I stopped confusing fear with responsibility. I spent money where I used to hoard it. I hired people smarter than me. Expected silence. I paid workers on time. I bought inventory before storms, trapping them. I listened to a waitress who could read numbers better than bankers. I trusted a lawyer people underestimated at their own expense. Frustin elmded Nos. I let old Nos Half nos talk. I turned small records into large consequences. Victor scoffed. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the diner receipt. Foss. His original paper was worn a clear sleeve. This was the first receipt, I said. $4.17. A murmur moved through the courtroom. I held it up. Victor Hale once told me I was born to be useful. He meant disposable, frasant. He meant the kind of man you overcharge, frighten, flatter, indept, and throw away. Victor's face had gone pale because he had said those words, not where anyone else could know. I decided he was right. About one thing, I said. I hone all to show for it. A usefulness is rumors. Useful records survive lies. Who useful, cruelty for intelligence. I lowered the receipt. So yes, I became useful. To merchants, family, to seniors. To families, to employees who needed safe work, had treated like collateral. And every time Mr. Hale tried to useful too, I looked at the evidence table. His invoices taught me to audit. His contract taught me to read clauses. His vandals taught me to photograph. His threats taught me to bring witnesses. His arson taught me to install lights. His banker taught me to build without begging banks for permission. Then I looked back at him. That is how I rose so fast. I spent every lesson he gave me. The courtroom was still, not conquered. That was better. The judge recessed soon after, for Shalom himself. Victor did not regain the room. Within 2 weeks, his attempt to withdraw the plea collapsed. Additional charges remained in motion. Frost. County Trust settled with several merchants and quietly paid more than they admitted. Lydia left the state after finalizing Lush in the divorce with terms so clean. Ruth called them merciful, bordering on insulting. I kept the store, fears and nauseous. I kept the warehouse. And on the day Victor's old office lease expired, I stood on the sidewalk while his company sign came down. Hale Distribution. The letters were faded where weather had gnawed at them. Victor was not there to see it. Had his C's in custodies. Awaiting sentencing, still writing letters to people who no longer returned them. Marcy stood beside me with a clipboard. "What are you putting there?" she asked. "For it." I looked at the empty window. She laughed. "Of course." Above us, the worker pulled the last screw free, and the sign dropped into his hands. A small thing, a perfect thing. That evening, I returned alone to Whitaker's corner market. Smelled of coffee, cardboard, lemon cleaner, and rain. The shelves were fuller now. The cooler hummed. Fear it. The new front window reflected the streetlights. On the wall behind the counter hung framed copies of three things: the diner receipt, the first irregular invoice, and the photograph of Victor holding the gasoline can under the floodlights. Not trophies. Nitune reminders. The black safe waited in the back room. I opened it. Kaze. The gold into impossible darkness. More wealth than I could spend in 100 careless lives. The system letters appeared as they always did. Current cashback multiplier 100 times. For a sound resolved. I frowned unresolved. I shone it. Pierce was exposed. Lydia was gone. For my enemies. My enemies had fallen in public. What remained? Frustrations. Then I understood. The grievance had never been only that they killed me. It was that I had lived small enough to believe killing me would be easy. Frest. I closed the safe without taking a coin. Outside, rain tapped against the new glass. I took the ledger from beneath the counter and opened to a fresh page. Not a revenge. Lost. A construction ledger. There were towns beyond ours, with small stores bleeding under friendly contracts. Fea. Farmers selling low. because they had no storage. Workers trapped by payday lenders. Widows losing buildings to banks that smiled through the paperwork. Force being trained to believe survival meant accepting smaller and smaller rooms. Gold could not fix all of that, but spending could build tools, funds, legal aid, purchasing councils, fireproof, records, doors where cages had been, and lost. I wrote the first line slowly. Usefulness is not what they take from you. It is what you choose to build after they fail. The bell above the front door chimed. Marcy stepped in, shaking rain from her coat, carrying 2 paper cups of diner coffee and a small bag. "Business biscuits," she said. I looked at the bag. "How much?" $2.16. I took the receipt from her hand and smiled. "Good." She leaned against the counter, eyes moving to the framed diner receipt on the wall. Pounds it soused. Now, I thought of the man who apologized too quickly. The man who saved pennies for a woman buying matches. The man who believed patience alone could turn neglect into love. Lost. "No," I said. "But I keep his receipts." Marcy handed me the coffee. The gold would return. It always did. But for once I cared more about the warmth in my hand, the clean window, the rain outside, the ledger waiting open, and the fact that nobody in the world knew exactly how expensive I had become and handed in town. $3.17. In this one, I bought back the future one receipt at a time.